This movie is all about loss, grief, and how each one of us deals with it. There's a ton of CGI, computer-generated graphics or information, imagery, but when you remove all of that, it's got a pretty good message. Now, how many people have seen this show? I always like to know. Okay, just a few people. For the rest of you, I'm just going to wreck this show for you. You're going to hear the whole story. How many people really don't like, superhero type movies? Don't go seeing it. Okay, just a couple. Okay, just a few of them. Okay, I like this one. I thought it was a really good show, but it asked one question: how do you deal with pain and loss? This is the one thing that binds us all together, whether we're old or young, whether we're a different race than another person or a different class, or what. I mean, just all the things that what binds us together. You're going to experience loss in this world. You're going to go through pain. You're going to have times of disappointment that just wreck you. And that's what brings us all together. And so that's where the theme of this is very powerful when you get down past all the razzle-dazzle. In the story, let me give you a little story recap. And if you're worried about a spoiler, here it comes. Doctor Strange has lost the love of his life. His pride, his desire for control. It opens up with him going to the wedding of the woman that he was in love with, his life love. And so he's just like right there. He sees she's so happy, and they talk, and they're like, just never quite worked out. It's so sad. It's a heartbreaker. And it could have happened, but because of his own issues, it never did. And so he's just dealing with that the rest of the movie, just like, man, I could have had that. That could have been me. And then the other person who's the star of the show, Wanda Maximoff, who's the Scarlet Witch, she's lost her husband. He's died. His name's Vision. And if you've seen the Avengers, you know what happened to him. But he's dead. There's no magic that's going to bring him back, and she has a tough time overcoming that loss. In fact, if you watch the TV show WandaVision, she creates an entire imaginary world where he's back alive, they've got 2 kids, and they live this happy life. She's really going into mental illness because of it. But she goes to any length to create a world where her husband and her kids are back with her. And that's where we get this whole idea of the multiverse. But it leaves us with this one question: how far are you willing to go to avoid the pain of loss? And it's not the loss so often that really causes so much destruction in this world, but it's the avoidance of it. It's the unwillingness to really face the difficulties that this life produces just by our very existence, by being here. So let's talk about our first point, the wrong way to deal with grief and loss. When I was watching this movie, it reminded me of a story in the Old Testament that's really very interesting story. And it's the story of Saul going to the witch of Endor. And we'll pick it up here in 1 Samuel chapter 28 and verse 3. And if you need a reload on your popcorn, just don't hesitate. Just walk right in there and just ask him for the big bucket, okay? Let's start reading here in verse 3. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in his own town of Ramah. Saul had expelled the mediums and spiritists from the land. The Philistines assembled and came to set up camp at Shunem, while Saul gathered all Israel and set up camp at Gilboa. When Saul saw the Philistine army, he was afraid. Terror filled his heart. He inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him by dreams or Urim or prophets. Saul then said to his attendants, "Find me a woman who's a medium," another word for a witch, "so I may go and inquire of her." "There's one in Endor," they said. So Saul disguised himself, putting on other clothes, and at night he and 2 men went to the woman. "Consult a spirit for me," he said, "and bring up for me the one I name." But the woman said to him, "Surely you know what Saul has done. He's cut off the mediums and spiritists from the land. Why did he set a trap for my life to bring about my death?" Saul swore to her by the Lord, "As surely as the Lord lives, you will not be punished for this." Then the woman asked, "Whom shall I bring up for you?" "Bring up Samuel," he said. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out at the top of her voice and said to Saul, "Why have you deceived me? You're Saul!" The king said to her, "Don't be afraid. What do you see?" The woman said, "I see a ghostly figure coming up out of the earth." "What does he look like?" he asked. "An old man wearing a robe is coming up," she said. Then Saul knew it was Samuel. And he bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" "I'm in great distress," Saul said. "The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has departed from me. He no longer answers me, either by prophets or by dreams. So I've called on you to tell me what to do." Samuel said, "Why do you consult me? Now that the Lord has departed from you and become your enemy. The Lord has done what he predicted through me. The Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hands and given it to one of your neighbors, to David. Because you did not obey the Lord or carry out his fierce wrath against the Amalekites, the Lord has done this to you today. The Lord will deliver both Israel and you into the hands of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. The Lord will also give the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines." Okay, this is an intense scene. Saul's desperate. He had been commanded to do some very specific things, and he just deliberately disobeyed. He just said, "I'm not going to do it. I'm going to do part of it, but I'm not going to do the whole thing." Not just once, but a couple times. And finally God said, "You're not going to be king any longer. I'm going to choose another king. And you're out." And that's what happens. And so Saul, at that point, spends his life denying it, just fighting against it. At this point, although he started out really humble, he became very proud and tried to hold on to the power that God had given him. And it separated him from God. And so on the eve of his death, when he's about to go into battle, he knows it's not going well. He knows it doesn't look good in terms of the battle tomorrow. And so he gets desperate. God's not answering him. He's super far from God. And so he gets desperate, and he goes and talks to a witch. Even though he'd already expelled all the witches from the land. Pretty intense. And so he consults a witch. So what can we learn from this passage? First of all, witches, mediums, spiritists, sorcery is real. Okay, how many people believe in a spiritual realm, spiritual world? Okay, aren't you spiritual people? Okay, it's so funny how we can say, yes, I believe that, but then when we hear a story about a ghost or something supernatural, that could never happen. Think about it. Okay, you believe in a spiritual world. And that's exactly what's happening here. We get a little view into a world we don't often see. There are powers and places that exist beyond this current world. And that's where it ties into the movie. Because in the movie, Dr. Strange goes, the first thing he does, he goes and talks to a witch. The Scarlet Witch. And so that's the decision he makes. It turns out to be a bad decision, just like it was a bad decision to talk to the Witch of Endor. But in Colossians Chapter 1, take a look what it says here. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. What do we learn here? We learn that Jesus has made everything. Everything that we can see, but also everything we can't see. This invisible world that is existing all around us, even though we can't see it. And he talks about the invisible realm, thrones, powers, rulers, or authorities. Reminds us of Ephesians 6 when it says, our battle isn't against flesh and blood, but against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And that's where this story of Dr. Strange, although it's very fanciful, and he's talking about multiple parallel universes and all that kind of stuff, I don't know if that's, that seems kind of far-fetched. But it is clear that there is a spiritual world and forces out there that we are not aware of. But they do exist. And we've got to take that into account. We've got to absolutely factor that into our lives. Instead of humbling himself before God and dealing with his sin and his pain, the pain of losing the kingdom, he looks to witchcraft to save his life and his throne. Let's move on here and take a look at the normal path of grief and loss. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did a lot of research into how people process grief and loss. And this was her theory. She said, basically, people go through 5 stages. Now, it's not always sequential, but typically when people are going through heavy-duty loss, they'll start to manifest these different stages. First of all is denial, which can show up in like avoidance. You don't want to deal with the issue. Confusion, even elation, like really super happy, just kind of unrealistically happy. Shock, fear. All those are forms of denial. Like if you lose somebody that you love, you just go, nope, I'm just not going to deal with that. And then there's anger and blame. This is another aspect of the grieving process, where you're upset, you're angry, you want someone to blame. And you see that so clearly in recent events. The shooting in Uvalde, the shooting's there, that's just tragic. But immediately on the tail of anything terrible like that, there's anger and blame. And where does that come from? That's part of the grieving process. It's like we're upset, we're going to blame somebody. It's this person, it's it's the Democrats, it's the Republicans. Someone is to blame. Then there's bargaining. If only I would have done this, it wouldn't have happened. That's where we try to explain or control it, try to find meaning in our loss. Then there's depression, and finally, acceptance, when we can process it and start to move on in our lives. So Saul loses his throne because he didn't obey God on several occasions, and he went through serious denial. Samuel had told him, said, someone better than you has been chosen to be the king. And instead of just saying, hey, I blew it, I'm sorry, I repent, I'm going to do better, he never did that. He never just dealt with his wrongdoing. Instead, he denied it and he turned his anger and blame against who? Come on, Bible readers. David, right? Yeah. David. Yeah. And he throws a spear at him. And he thinks he's getting paranoid. He thinks David's trying to kill him. And so David goes into hiding for over 10 years. And that's where we pick up this story. David is still running from this man who will not accept the fact that his throne is done. It's been taken away from him. He's in major denial and total anger. He never got out of that stage of the grieving process, and he chased David his whole life. And instead of getting humble before God, accepting his loss, taking responsibility, he tried to find a cheat code in the universe. He said, okay, I gotta stay king. God's not listening to me. Okay, what can I do? I'm gonna go talk to a witch. Instead of just simply say, I blew it. It's clear I did wrong. He's like, there's gotta be some way I can hold on to this throne. So how does this apply to us? Let's just bring this home. You gotta move through your grief, pain, loss. Now, not move on or move past, but move through it. Because when you face loss, and you're going to, if you haven't already multiple times, you're gonna experience many of these things and exactly what she's talking about. You're gonna go through that, and you have to move through it. You have to allow it to happen before you're able to move on and move past. What are we talking about? How about the loss of a child? How about the loss of a marriage? Your husband walks out on you, or your wife walks out on you. How about sudden illness, stroke, heart attack? How about when your kids don't do well? You just have high hopes, you pour everything into them, they walk away from God, or they don't talk to you? How about when someone you love walks away from God? Is that painful or what? I mean, it just aches, physically aches. How about when you end up losing your job and it's not fair? You get your job taken away from you, and basically you get railroaded, and you know that it's just politics. That's a loss. That's a massive loss. People say, oh, just move on. But you're dealing with something super deep. Financial loss, losing money. Not ending up where you thought you should. You know, oh man, I should be here by now. But I'm just right here, still struggling. That's a loss. How about growing up in an abusive family and just going, man, I wish I would have grown up in a family that was normal. And just the grief that just goes with, how come everyone else is happy and I had to deal with this upbringing? Those are losses. That's grief. How about a relationship not working out? We want this relationship so badly to work out. We don't want to give it up. We're in denial to avoid the pain of moving on. And for many of us, we go to great lengths to avoid the pain of this grieving process, of really dealing with how huge this loss is. And so what do? Diversion and distraction are two big things. Binging TV, video games, pornography, doing things so that you don't have to think about your situation. It's really interesting. Has anyone seen WandaVision? Okay, WandaVision. It's interesting because it came out right during the middle of COVID, and it's all about this woman dealing with her loss by creating a sitcom that she lives in where she's super happy, and it starts with 50 sitcoms and it goes into 60 sitcoms, and she just creates this little bubble where she's all happy. She's got her kids, she's got her husband, and she's super happy. And it fits perfectly in with during COVID. Our whole country, the world, went through major, major trauma. And what did many people do? What did we all do? We spent a lot of time watching TV, didn't we? Just dealing that, so we don't have to think about it. And all the stuff that's happening. Drugs and drinking. Wanda uses witchcraft to get what she wants. She wants to capture this woman who can travel between worlds and go into different worlds. She wants to find her family that's not with her, but in a different parallel universe. And so the perfect life she dreams of with her dead husband and imaginary kids is what she's going after, and she won't stop until she gets it. What I find interesting is that in Galatians Chapter 5, verse 20, let's look at the next slide here. This is a scripture often read. It says, the acts of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity and debauchery, idolatry and witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. There's a long list of sins that are right there in the Bible. You probably read it at least once if you've been around the church very long. But that word for witchcraft is pharmakia. You can see it on the bottom. Pharmakia. That's the word that we get pharmacy from. Pharmaceuticals. Pharmacology. And so depending on the context, it can mean sorcery and witchcraft, or it can mean drug use. And so there's a connection there between witchcraft and drug use. And these are, these words here are typically translated sorcery, witchcraft, sorcery, and so, in fact, right now it's super popular. Has anyone read the book How to Change Your Mind? Okay, good. I'm glad you haven't read that. But it's a very popular book right now. But what it is, there's a big resurgence in people looking into LSD and mind-altering drugs in an attempt. There's a lot of different research into it, but also to get into the spiritual realm, to get into the other world. And so this whole book is all written about that. Now, that used to be popular in the 50s and 60s, people tripping, but it's a resurgence right now. In fact, I had an old friend of mine write me a letter, and he said, take a look at this website. And there's like a website for, it's like pharmaceuticals and Christianity. It was like LSD and trying to follow Christ through chemistry. Okay, I'm not going to join the club. Right? Don't worry. But the point of it is this. They're connected. And a lot of times what we're doing is when we get into drugs and when we get into drinking, it takes us to a different world. It's an attempt to escape from what we're facing, and we want to go somewhere else. I just thought that was super interesting, and her being a witch. So that's where she's using her witchcraft to find a different way. And then Dr. Strange, on the other hand, is a control freak. Okay, his former lover says, you always had to be the one holding the knife or the scalpel. You have a control issue. And so the opening scene, he takes control over somebody else to get what he wants. Now let's tie it in, let's talk about us. We oftentimes, when we're dealing with intensely painful stuff, we'll make something happen, even though a relationship or a financial issue or a toxic friendship, even though our actions are hurting others and ultimately ourselves, we'll push it. We'll force it. We'll try to make something happen that really is over. It should be left in the past, but we just won't let it go. We've got a relationship, it's not good, it's not healthy, it's toxic, but we just keep doing it because we're familiar with it. The movie ends when Wanda gets what she wants. She realizes she can never get back the husband that she lost, who's dead. And it's interesting in the movie because she says over and over again, I'm not a monster. Basically, I'm not a bad person. I'm being reasonable. I'm not a monster. And her view of herself is like, I'm really a good person, just trying to get what is really deserved me. I should have this. And so at the climax of the movie, she realizes how her avoidance of pain is causing pain in others, and it's turning her into the monster she never wanted to be. She finally comes to acceptance, and that ends the story. Let's take a look at this clip.
What have you done? I wouldn't hurt anyone. I'm not a monster.
She says, I'm not a monster. And that's when she realizes she's become a monster. In her desire to avoid the pain of her loss and get the family back, the kids, those are her kids in a different universe, she realized she's become a different person. And in our attempt to deal with the pain in our lives, it can change us. If we don't go through the grieving process properly, and we try to force something that shouldn't happen, we can become a different person. Dr. Strange makes peace with two things. One, he's never going to get the love of his life back. And he can't always be in control. And so he lets someone else, this young woman is in there, someone else take charge and solve the problem. He comes to a place of acceptance, and that's where the movie ends. So the conclusion is this: how do you deal with grief, pain, and loss? I know everyone in here has something that they've lost, someone they've lost, some situation that just can't be solved, won't go away. You think about it, you dwell on it, you ruminate on it, you just go over and over again. How can this, I can't believe this is happening. First of all, turn toward God and spiritual relationships, not diversions or drugs. Face it. Grief and loss can often be the best opportunity to get close to God. God will speak to us through pain because we all deal with it. It's part of the human condition. Trouble, transition, tension, you're going to face it in this life. Are you allowing that to draw you closer to God, or are you running away? Make the changes that you were called to make. Don't be like Saul, who looked for a loophole, who looked for a cheat code just to get past it. Be a person that says, listen, I'm going to have to learn something from this. I'm going to have to go through this grieving process. It hurts. I hate it. My life stinks right now, but I'm going to go through it. Then turn toward the pain and let yourself move through the process of healing. Each one of us is going to have to accept the pain now and make hard decisions or lose the chance later, like Saul did. You have to be willing to surrender control. In our minds, we have in our minds the way the world should be, don't we? I should be super handsome. I should be, a millionaire. I should be married to this woman. We've got all that in our minds. This is the way life should be. And many, oftentimes we go to great lengths to try to match up. But you got to be willing to surrender control and say, listen, that's not the way it is. It's going to accept the way it actually is. Even if it's technically possible, even if you're superpowered or spiritually possible, it may not be the right thing to do. To just force something that's not meant to be. I was talking with Jackie Regatta the other day. We were having a discipling time in the Regattas. And I talked to Jackie and I asked her, got her permission to share about this. But I go, there are a few people I know that have experienced the level of loss that she has. When she was 16, her dad was murdered, execution style, right here in Marana. She saw him the night before and never saw him again. They found his body a couple weeks later. On a trip to Mexico, she's in 2 cars. Cars were pulled over. Her husband was abducted. Never saw him again. Disappeared. Never found the body. When she married Martine, she had to post an ad because she wasn't divorced. They never found the body. They never found out what happened to him specifically. She had to post an ad saying, hey, I'm looking for this person. She knew he's never going to respond to it. But in order for her to get a divorce or remarry, she had to do that. And I just asked her a question. I said, how long did it take for you to get over that? She said, I don't think you ever get over it, but you get through it. And she says, sometimes if Martine is out and the kids are out of the house and he doesn't answer my call, one time I was looking out the window and he wouldn't respond to my call, I just started crying. And I said, God, don't take away this husband. It's just so intense. But I really appreciate Jackie because she's moved through those stages of grief. She doesn't deny it. I mean, it's just so intense, and yet she's made it. And she's such a strong woman, and amazing, helping other people, loving other people, raising a great family. Such a great example of dealing with grief and loss in a godly way. I hope today, from this lesson, go see the movie. I think it's pretty fun. But more than anything, deal with your loss and your grief in a godly way. Thank you very much.